on mediums of self-expression. Self-expression should really be, well, I don't know if it should be anything. I guess that's the whole point of the fact that you are self-expressing. How can you say what self-expression should be when part of it is reflecting what is? And sometimes what should be and what is, there's going to be a contradiction there. That said, one may have things that one strives for, right? I know. I'm getting really quite abstract here. Let me start from the beginning. Let me try to be more not from the beginning. Do you know what I hate? I don't know. Sometimes I'm just tired and my mind doesn't think right and I embarrass myself. But then I think, you know what? I am in love with Michel de Montaigne and the fact that he just is who he is and knows that sometimes his mind isn't where he wants his mind to be, but he's going to steer through the muck, so to speak, anyway. I also do have this thing for Howard Stern. I don't know why. I mean, I just really love the way he says whatever it is in life he wants to say. Even if he realizes maybe in hindsight, maybe he wouldn't have said it if he could go back. But that's a whole different topic, really, isn't it? One of the interesting things about being alive in the 21st century, which I think is especially unique to any other time, is the plethora of mediums of self-expression we have at our disposal. Is that the right word? I don't think I want to use the word disposal. At our within reach for very little money. So today, in fact, I'm doing an experiment and I'm podcasting instead of video blogging, and I've got a couple of reasons for doing it. And I will start with this, though. One philosopher I'm really intrigued by, who has my attention. Let's see if I can pull out one of his books here. I haven't read it yet, but I do need to. Sartre. Jean-Paul Sartre. What I like about him is that he writes in more than one genre. He writes plays, he writes novels, he writes essays. I think that's all really awesome and inspirational, because one of the crises, I mean, I don't know that it's actually fair to call it a crisis per se. One of the, you see how hyperbolic we can be when we're not revising what we write. That's one reason why I love extemporaneous talking so much, is because you get the unedited, more natural, real version of somebody's soul, as we're saying here. I have an obsession with soul. That's one of the reasons why I like video blogging. I like just being able to preserve. I mean, I say it over and over again. Oh, that's life though, isn't it? And there's so many things we say over and over again. We all have our mantras. We do. We all have our mannerisms. I listen to Rachel Maddow at night often. Sometimes I admit lately I've been I'm just so all over the place in my mind lately, trying to figure a lot of things out. I've been in one of the deepest periods of contemplation in my entire life, I think. Specifically, I mean, being out of college, one of the benefits is the fact that now that I don't have homework assignments or required reading, everything is much more autonomous and I can think as I would like to think without being told without the pressure of obligation. I don't always hate obligations. It's part of life to have obligations, but when you can disintegrate as many obligations as you can and simplify your life, I really do think that's absolutely quite wonderful. Simplifying life. In all contexts. I mean, even my computer, I like to get rid of as many things on my desktop screen as possible and put them in the laptop's recycle bin. I like as few things as possible on my desk. I like as few tasks as possible within the day. The irony is there are just so many things that I want to do. Perhaps you have that feeling as well, that there's just too many things. Way too many things. And I use one of those filler words. I hate when I do that. But I was talking about Rachel Maddow and how I watch her. And that we all have mantras, things we just kind of say, mannerisms. One of hers, I note, is that she uses that filler word. She says, I mean, a lot. I'm not picking fun at Rachel Maddow. I love Rachel Maddow. I think that she's a genius. And she makes my days better by having her political insights for my contemplation. Not that I agree with her 100% of the time. In fact, if I could offer one criticism, honestly, I would say that I thought she was too nice to some of the Democratic candidates in the most recent debates that took place last week. I think, for example, she could have been a lot more critical of... She could have been more reflective of why Andrew Yang didn't get so much attention. I do believe she made a comment about it. Very brief. Just mentioning he didn't have much talking time. But she was part of the debate. She was part of the creation of the debate. So one of my questions for Rachel is, what's your opinion on the fact that this guy didn't get much talking time? And what about how unfair that was? And I also didn't like how there was something else that was really bothering me about the debate that I thought she allowed it to slip by. I can't remember what it is, though. Don't you hate when your memory doesn't work for you as you wished that it could have worked for you? I know I do. Another reason I love Montaigne is because he has a similar issue. His memory just doesn't work at times as he'd like it to work, and he talks about that. I'm talking about mediums of self-expression here, and how there are just so many different ways to do it. And I was talking about like this podcast experiment as one. You might be wondering, so why am I doing this? What motivated me to do this as opposed to veering away from the video blogging I was doing? Honestly, I was just looking at the viewership and the audience engagement, and I did note that more people were willing to listen to a Sean O'Connor Public podcast than a Sean O'Connor Public comment vlog. So I thought maybe the rational thing to do, if I really do feel compelled to carry on up to about 40 minutes, the research suggests, as I've been reading up on this, people who listen to their podcasts are willing to have their podcast play in the background and listen for up to 40 minutes and maybe listen to more than one podcast. With a YouTube video, people usually aren't really so into doing more than about 10 minutes most of the time. I owe you the source of that statistic, though. I did have that somewhere. I can tell you, though, it was from podcastinghacks.com was one source. And true, I should probably be vetting them as well. I think you have a good point there. If you were thinking it. And I hope you don't mind my drinking coffee as I do this. It's just one of those days where my mind feels like a jellyfish in that. Is it a jellyfish or an octopus or something, like with just all these tentacles going in all these different directions and going back to mediums, self-expression. It's been the story of my life, is playing with different mediums of self-expression. Self-expression has really been one of the major constants in my life, has been self-expression, whether it's been an interest in acting or political commentary or doing experimental video art or video blogging or writing a novel or a flash fiction or a personal essay. All of these different things I've liked to experiment with. And all the time, though, well, not all the time, but often I find myself wrestling with why one medium over another. And I'm really learning not to confine myself so much, and also to try and find an integration that works. One that will also be good for you and I. You see, if it's not obvious by now, talking is probably my favorite thing in the world to do. Talking, to me, is the single greatest art, because it's the most interactive you have with thought. I like talking a lot better than writing, because the fundamental difference being with writing, and I know I've said this before, but it's worth saying again and again, right? I was talking about how we have our mantras, we have our things that we say over and over again. With talking, the thing is, you're right at the thought where it is. Now, with writing, you do have the advantage of saying, oh, that wasn't the thought I want. I can strike that from the record. And that's fine. And I think that definitely has its place in a very formal context. I think writing is really good for something formal, or if you just want to have the words down in a context in which somebody can read. However, I think if we're talking about verbal communication in general, especially when it comes to dealing with an interest in thoughts, in my opinion, talking is actually the better of the mediums, because you are right in touch with the thought where it is, and you can work off that thought. I mean, you can do that with writing too. Obviously, you don't have to scratch out what you write. You can put it in brackets for yourself and say, this is something I'm going to strike from what I'm writing. But the difference is when you talk, as opposed to when you just simply write, or when you write in a talky way, I guess you should say. But for efficiency of communication here, let's use the word talk. When you talk, you're just right at the immediacy of the soul. You're right where you are with what you're thinking, and you go from that. It's very, I've mentioned before my interest in jazz and the beat movement and stream of consciousness and this realm of artistic expression, the spontaneity, Jackson Pollock, because it's right where the soul is. And there has to be an appreciation for that, because it's true. It's honest. And honesty is very, very, very important, especially in an era of politics where, we've got folks like President Trump who lie so pathologically that it has us wondering about, it changes the way I think we conceptualize the validity of our communication. I know that probably many of us have been cynical of politicians always, because so much of politics is a dark, awful, manipulative thing. I mean, even a so-called good politician will probably find themselves in a scenario where if they want a certain policy, then especially, look, even in a dictatorship, right? And I'm not talking about dictatorship in some kind of way to shed legitimacy to it, to suggest legitimacy to it. The point that I'm actually trying to make is to contemplate how it has a certain relation, comparability to other political realities, how it has something in common. Even in a dictatorship, though, the dictator has to have a degree of his or her supporters, his bureaucrats, the people, his advisors or her advisors, the people surrounding the dictator who give the dictator power. Those people have to have a degree of confidence in the dictator. And so the dictator, has a choice either of murdering those who question him or her, or when they dare debate with the dictator and question the dictator, especially if it's a majority of them, the dictator may have to change the dictator's position on something. My point here then in this thought is to say that one of the complexities of politics is that you are dealing with people, and in dealing with people there's you can't have everything, and so it's inevitable that a politician might deeply want one thing and ultimately settle for something else. And there's the conversation about when is that ethical and when is that unethical. The question of impeaching Donald Trump really being a fantastic way to contemplate that question. I'm of the opinion that you just can't really play politics with violations of the law. The fact is that President Trump is in violation of the Emoluments Clause. The fact is that President Trump is obstructing justice. These are just, I think, the two most flamboyant examples of his criminality. So we really can't stand for that. And there is the question of, Otto von Bismarck says that politics is the art of the possible, right? So there's a question of that Nancy Pelosi is playing. If impeachment efforts are never going to amount to anything, then why bother and especially if it's only going to hurt Democrats and their image politically in the PR sense, right? On the other hand, there's the argument of, well, the president is breaking the law, and even if efforts to hold him accountable through the impeachment mechanism, which the founders of our Constitution established for us, even if it's going to fail, it's still the proper thing to do. And so you have that kind of tension of choosing between the proper thing to do and the politically most, attractive thing to do. And sometimes the question is, when do you go with ethics, even if it means looking bad politically? And I've been arguing for some time now that for the Democrats to say that their fear is that, it's going to hurt their re-election efforts or make them look bad if they go for impeaching the president, or that it's a waste of time anyway. In my opinion, they're just as bad as the Republicans, because isn't that the whole excuse that the Republicans sort of hide behind? The fact that they don't want to lose a re-election, so they can't be seen as being critical of the president. How did we get to that? What did I digress from when I was supposed to be talking about mediums of self-expression? I don't even remember. This is a super improvised episode because sometimes the thoughts just kind of pour out and you don't take the time to outline. I usually do prefer taking the time to outline. About 9 times out of 10, I do write an outline before I do any kind of extemporaneous talking. But today was sort of an exception, as I'm doing this sort of podcast experiment and contemplating the question of the proper mediums of self-expression. And it's telling you that I wanted to make sure that I am reaching you in the right way. I tend to prefer, I think, the video blogging, but maybe I don't really. Maybe I actually like this better. I admit that, though, you have to ask who wants to watch a 40-minute video blog, and why would they? And especially if you can get the same kind of content, but on a podcast. I'm not so narcissistic that I think that you need to necessarily look at me all the time to get the same effect. Not to say that I should stray entirely from the video blog, but I should probably figure out when it's appropriate to do a video blog versus when it's appropriate perhaps to podcast. That's the thought that I'm having today. All stemming back to this question of self-expression and the right way to express oneself. Again, especially in this context where even 200 years ago, yes, you could write, and there were different modes of writing, and there's painting and architecture and dance, and so there's all these artistic mediums, of course. But as we move here into the 21st century, you've got podcasting, you've got video blogging, you've got different kinds of podcasts and video blogs, you've got poetry, you've got the personal essay, you've got the novel, you've got flash fiction, then you've got all of the arts people are used to, and then you have web design, and you have just all of these different things. Maybe you're an inventor and there's something more technological to your artistry and self-expression. There's just so many different avenues. And when you live in a world of so much possibility, this was when I first recognized that it would appear that we have the experience of free will. I say that as opposed to having complete free will. I think it would seem contradictory to say that human beings somehow are not subject to physics and biology and just the basic fundamental laws of nature. That being said, it would appear to be a law of nature that we experience the sense of having free will. One of those things I don't think that you could, I don't know that you can undo the experience of feeling like you're making a choice. And what the depths of the psychology are in that is something beyond my ability to speculate on at this time. But where was I going with that anyway? I don't remember. I just don't. I hate when that happens. We were talking about that before, the way the memory can just get you. I was saying, though, how with all these different options, what was after the point on options? I hate when I lose a thought. That makes me very mad. But these things are going to happen sometimes. I'm ready to embrace that life can be imperfect. I'm ready to embrace the fact that I can be imperfect and that I can just, what's that expression? Be me, as the expression goes, or one can just be one's self. One can just be oneself, whoever you are, however you are. That's not to say that one shouldn't strive to be good. Two different conversations to have. Of course you should strive to be good and to ever improve. I think the difference being you just can't crucify yourself when you don't operate the way you absolutely hoped you would operate. Instead, you have to ask, why didn't I operate the way I wanted to operate, and how can I operate better? That sound too cerebral for you? Did that even sound cerebral at all? I don't know. But I find this podcasting endeavor, I did it earlier. I did it about a month ago, or just a little over a month ago. I was experimenting with podcasting. I did like it. One of the things is it's just, well, obviously there is probably a bit of a less self-consciousness thing going on. Not that I really care so much about, well, I mean, I care how I look. It's not that I don't care how I look. I absolutely care how I look. But I just don't really have a panic attack over it or anything like that. That said, one also wants to do all one can do not to appear jarring on video. As to why one would or wouldn't appear jarring, I suppose that's another conversation. But many of us will have that sort of subconscious self-consciousness, right? And so the podcasting medium does present one with the opportunity probably to have a bit less self-consciousness. I mean, another advantage I would think is just that, again, I get that when you're watching a video, it's a lot more sensory perception. It's a lot more sensory intake. Additionally, the advantage of the podcast is it's a said thing. They all say it now, right? You can listen to it in your car, you can listen while you're cleaning, while you're exercising, blah, blah, blah. And they're arguably more popular. I don't know, are they more popular than YouTube videos? I don't actually know that they... I don't know, I should have had that statistic. Perhaps one of you can get that statistic for me. One of the things that you do have to deal with when you do extemporaneous speaking, one of the problems with extemporaneous speaking is that you just can't have all of the data that you might want. Whereas if you write a script for yourself, or if you do sort of extremely if you engage in in-depth preparation, then you have a lot more information at your within your reach. And there is the question of then what is the better way of doing things? Is it the spontaneity of soul or the superabundance of information that you want to provide? In my opinion, I think we get enough information. I think we're inundated. I've talked about it a lot here. I talk a lot about information overload. I'm fine to take a step back and say, yes, there are the facts and figures that I want to have and that I want to have within reach to share, but that also I'm fine not having every piece of information. And in fact, you couldn't have every bit of information you'd want anyway. That actually reminds me, there's this great essay I'm reading by Montaigne. I can open it up for you. It's called The Doings of Certain Ambassadors. And he talks in this essay about how people go beyond their area of expertise and how it's not really the most becoming thing, in his opinion. He says here, we should always lead architects, painters, cobblers, and so on to talk of their own business. That's essentially the thesis that he has here. And he just gives examples of people and how they were good at particular things and not so good at other things, and how they look the best when they talk about what they know about, and that they appear rather foolish when they talk about those things that they don't know about. And I think that's fair enough. That's one of the lessons I've had to learn in life, even very recently, and I've talked to you about it before, is like the need to in fact settle on a niche or niche. You can pronounce it either way, I'm told. You can't know it all. And so I've had to really ask myself, what do I feel that I know better than any other thing? And I consider myself to essentially have 3 topics that I believe I'm most competent in. And that's why I say that those are the things I talk about. I believe that my top 3 conversations, topics of conversation and thoughts and such, are philosophy, politics, and the self. Though I like to use the term autobiography or memoir or introspection, I haven't decided what's really the most appropriate term there. But the point being that in terms of how I like to approach my self-expression, to go back to that, as that's the topic of this particular item here, for me, especially in contemplating philosophical questions, I find that the best way to really identify philosophical ideas that are practical is to examine how they actually relate in your real life. That's first of all. Second of all, it just happens to be that my mind is inherently philosophical. So, for example, even if I'm reading a piece of quote-unquote literature, there's a lot of it that escapes my appreciation. I'm thinking especially like imagery, for example, in contrast to the philosophical ideas and claims or implications, or just what are the clear values and fundamental philosophical assumptions that the speaker, say, of a work of literature is resting upon and building upon. Those are the kinds of things that interest me, that I'm able to concentrate on much more than the imagery or certain other details. I'm thinking, for example, does this character or the narrator have some sort of political opinion? To what degree does this person care or not care about politics? To what extent does this person think logically? To what extent does this person appear to value logic, consciously or subconsciously, explicitly or implicitly? Things of that sort. That's one reason why conventional poetry, much of it is really quite a headache for me, is because it's sort of not very explicit, and certainly not very explicitly logical, or not very explicitly logical attempt at articulating a philosophy. There are some people who think actually that philosophy and art are perhaps not compatible. I'm not terribly sure I agree with that. That is the opinion some people have. There is a book I'm looking for. I don't have it in my vicinity. I thought I did. I don't know where I put it. But it's this really interesting book about the role of clarity in poetry. And this author finds that most poetry lacks clarity, but should have more clarity. And this is indispensable to my philosophical thinking. And that's another thing. As I contemplated for many, many, many years questions of poetry, and what I've come to is a value of clarity, and I realize that that's an aesthetic opinion and that it's a philosophical thought, and that my own fundamental philosophical ideas have to do with clarification. That's why I call myself a practical clarificationist, and that's the philosophy I advocate. So I'm going to say that's that for today, because I do not like to go on too long. I should probably not allow these to go anywhere. I don't know yet. I'm thinking, between 30 minutes and an hour, I guess. I don't know how long they should go. If you guys have thoughts, look, I want you to share them. I want to express my thoughts via talking in the best way possible. And I am experimenting with how to do that and value your feedback. Anyway, so I'll talk to you a little bit later. I hope that you're having a great day. Bye.